Hey everyone, if you're interested in a career in the Air Force, then please stay tuned because you're in for a treat. Hi, I'm Kiki.
And I'm Kemi.
And you're listening to
Your Advisors Will See You Now, a podcast that will help you to figure out all of your options for life after high school.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Your Advisors Will See You Now podcast. We are back with one of our career chats. So if you are new here or if you haven't been here in a long time, our career chats are episodes where we talk to people in various careers. We want to give listeners a sense of what those people do in their day-to-day career, how they got into that field, highlights and challenges. So this is really just a virtual audio day in the life of different careers. So if you've been with us in the month of July, we've been highlighting careers in the military. So today we are joined by Taja Blackman. She is an officer in the Air Force. She has since separated, but she'll talk about that and talk about why. So I'm going to read her bio, and I'm gonna let Taja do all the talking, but I'll read her bio and then we'll get started. So Taja was in the Reserve Officer Training Corps, ROTC, during her undergraduate career, which led her to commissioning into the Air Force in 2018. During her time in the Air Force, which was 2018 to 2023, she was a logistics readiness officer, and she served in Illinois, Texas, and Saudi Arabia. So we're going to want to know all about that, as much as you can tell, of course. And like I mentioned, she's currently separated from the Air Force, and she is pursuing a doctorate of physical therapy. And she begins in a few days. We're recording this in late July. So Taja's starting her program in just a few days. So that's super exciting. So thank you, Taja, for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, you're sweet. You're welcome. You're welcome. So just to get started, if you could just give a little bit about yourself, like your educational background, and if you want to give a little bit more detail about what your role or your career in the Air Force was, we'll get started with those things.
Absolutely. So my background, I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and that was from 2014 to 2018. I wasn't planning on doing ROTC at first.
Okay.
And there's a whole story behind that.
Okay, I was wondering. So yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I wasn't planning on it. However, a couple months before school started, my wonderful mom, love her, got to talking to a recruiter for ROTC, and I ended up chatting with him reluctantly.
Okay.
But it ended up turning into some great things. So I did ROTC all throughout college. And my undergraduate degree was in exercise sports science. I ended up near the end of college, we commission and we give a list of preferences for which jobs we'd want to have. And it's a list of 6, and they ended up giving me career number 6 out of 6, which was logistics readiness officer. And so then I ended up doing that for the next 5 years. And it was definitely a journey. I learned a lot. Through that. And yes, just let me know where you want me to go from there.
Yeah, no, very cool. I'm just curious. So we've talked to like a few people in the military, and it seems like everyone's like the way they get your careers or the way the careers are assigned are very different. So I don't think, I think you're the first person that has been commissioned in like undergrad. Mm-hmm. How does that work? So you said they gave you a list of 6 jobs. You got the 6 on the list. Like, how does that work? Like, you have to do a test for it, or do they just kind of place you?
Yes. So we do something called, I think it's junior year, we have to do a AFOQT, which is essentially like a standardized test for incoming officers in the Air Force. And that essentially kind of places you in a specific category of which jobs you could get. So I had a huge list, way over 6 of jobs that I could place in my preferences. And I ended up choosing an array of jobs, including logistics readiness officer.
Okay.
And mainly that test, if you score really, really high on it, you can qualify for things like being a pilot. So that's really mainly what it's for, to see if you can qualify or not to be a pilot.
Okay, very cool. Mm-hmm. And I just out of curiosity, I saw on your resume, which is like amazing. Taja is super decorated too. It's just like very cool. You have a lot of like you have like awards and stuff.
I think a couple.
So. No, she's being humble. She's being humble. I saw your minor was like aerospace. Forgot the last part.
Aerospace studies. Mm-hmm.
Studies. Thank you. Was that something you decided like towards the end, or did you go into college? Like, I guess once you decided you were doing ROTC, did you decide from the beginning that you want to do that minor?
Funny enough, that minor, you get it when you do ROTC all throughout college.
Gotcha.
So in ROTC, you have to take a series of classes, I think one every semester, and then you have something called leadership lab as well. So that's 2 hours a week where you're, leading, and they're teaching you leadership skills, communication skills, followership skills, how to work as a teammate, how to brief or how to give presentations. All of those things are in this class. But then there is an aerospace studies class where you learn pretty much all about the history of the Air Force. So with those classes that we had to take, that automatically qualified me to get the aerospace studies minor.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. And I'm not sure if you know, but if ROTC is like at certain school, I know every school doesn't have ROTC. Is it pretty common that you like get some type of minor? Like, was yours specific to because you're going into the Air Force, or is that like what Chapel Hill offered? Do you think it's like based on the school you go to?
I think it's based on the school you go to. I believe that if you do ROTC, you will get that minor as well. But I could have double minored in something else. I was on the track for Chinese, and then I was not on the track for Chinese junior year.
Understand.
So I believe that's the minor that you get regardless of the school, but I'd have to double check with that.
Yeah, no, it's fine. And we always encourage our listeners to do your research. So listeners, do your research if that is something you're interested in. So we'll back up to ROTC. I know you said your mom. Yes, we love her. Her mom is so fun. Her. She's amazing. But she said she wanted. I mean, sometimes our parents do know best. Sometimes, but I guess the ROTC is kind of like a precursor to the military. So if anyone's listening and they're interested in ROTC, because it's not a requirement to do ROTC before. Okay. So what would you say like the benefits maybe of doing ROTC were? And if you could just give like a brief description of what that time in ROTC is like.
Okay. Absolutely. So ROTC, essentially it taught me how to get out of my shell because I was a very reserved person before. And that also happened throughout my Air Force career as well. So I'm not just going to say like fully attribute it to ROTC, but it was a nice stepping stone of learning how to, lead, learning how to get comfortable with being in kind of unknown situations. And so it helped a lot regarding that. And then also I met so many friends. I loved my ROTC little family that we called it. And we were a very small detachment. That's what it's called. Pretty much in ROTC at a school is called a detachment. But we were very small, so we were close-knit. I had so many friends in it, and it was just a nice transition into college as well. So for me, since I went to a small high school, I was very nervous about going to Chapel Hill. It's a humongous school. And then that was a nice way to transition me in while also learning about myself, learning about the military, and then also learning how to just skills that are beneficial in being an adult. So we would play sports. We have PT tests, so physical fitness tests. So we're working out all the time. We're always doing things that kind of like challenge us to, okay, critical thinking, problem solving skills, all of those things. And it was just a really nice way to kind of build camaraderie, have a friend group. And that was wonderful. And it was unexpected because, like we were saying with my mom, I was not planning on joining ROTC at all. That was not on my radar. And my mom knew someone who was actually in ROTC at the time at UNC Charlotte. And she talked to her and she, had amazing things to say. And she's like, Taja, you have to do this. And I'm just like, what are you talking about?
Like, why?
Like, I've never thought about the military. What?
Right.
But she was incredibly jazzed. I trust my mom's judgment a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I talked to the recruiter. He explained it, said that it would be a wonderful way to have a career after college that's guaranteed, which was amazing. I will say, not having the stress of graduating college and being like, okay, what now? Now I have to find a job. And knowing that I had a job, that was kind of nice. That was actually really nice. And so the recruiter talked about all of these things. He talked about potential scholarships, talked about grants that I can get, talked about GI Bills, which are amazing. So I don't want to jump around too much, but I'm going into a doctor of physical therapy program in a couple weeks. And I'm able to use the post 9/11 GI Bill, which is essentially money for school from the military. And I'm able to pay for a lot of my doctorate program with that, which is incredible. Absolutely incredible. So there's definitely a lot of benefits that he talked to me about. And I was like, you know what? I don't know if I want to do this, but let me try it out. And I tried it out and I stuck with it for 4 years. And then I jumped in the Air Force after.
Very cool. So like being in ROTC, I guess I'll ask this first. Like, what is it like being in ROTC? I feel like it's similar to the military. Like it's similar to being like the waking up early. I know you're also a student still. So like how do you balance like student life and ROTC life? 'Cause I'm sure they're having you, like you mentioned, like physical fitness tests and leadership classes, like on top of your major already, which I know we all know, like within a minor and a major, if you're going to have both, you got to work hard regardless. But I guess like what was the balance like, and kind of what was some of like the rigor of ROTC? You can just like touch on it briefly if you'd like.
Absolutely. So, it definitely was intense. It was challenging, and I guess I didn't help myself as well because I got a job as a resident advisor for a first year dorm for 3 years. So after I finished being a first year, I jumped into being an RA as well. So aside from working, you have the rigor of school, getting assignments done, all of that stuff. And then ROTC, well, the recruiter said that it was going to be 5 hours. All right, we're going to be real for a second. He said 5 hours a week. 5 hours a week. No, ma'am. It was closer to, I'd say, 10 to 15.
A lot for college, though.
Yes, it is. So it definitely teaches you how to have time management. You have to figure out, you have to be good with your calendar. You have to have things organized. And, that's something that I struggled with quite a bit my first year. Of, oh my gosh, I didn't even have a job yet, but it's just, okay, I'm in these classes. I have to balance having leadership lab, my aerospace studies classes that, I didn't plan on taking before. And then there's additional things. So we do community service together. We will work out outside of our designated, I think it was 2 mornings a week that we'd have it pretty early. It was at 6 a.m. And then we would have, just after a while, you have jobs in ROTC. So you'll be like a wing commander, or you'll be something like a treasurer. or different roles that you have to have a little bit of responsibility. So definitely balancing all of that was a challenge, but you get into the swing of things, you kind of understand the rhythm. But it wasn't easy at first to adjust to that.
You couldn't have done it. Couldn't have been me, but
it's tough.
no, you couldn't have. But no, this like just to hear the benefits, like the payoff of it, it's definitely worth it. So I'm sure anyone, if you're like, oh, it couldn't have been me. If you're like me, you're like, it couldn't have been me. Then
I thought it couldn't have been me either. So
you make it work. You make it happen.
You make it work. Yes.
That's kind of crazy. Do you think they I'm just curious. Like, do you think they tell you it's 5 hours a week, knowing good and well that it's not, and they just it's how they pull you in? Okay.
Yes. And that's something that, the recruiter that I had, he ended up being a part of the leadership, an amazing person, wonderful. He was a captain at the time. But of course, their job is to get you to want to do it. So you always have to do your own research. And I tell that to everyone. Because if I took a moment to simply ask somebody that was in ROTC before I joined, they would have told me, at least I would hope that they would have told me, okay, the 5 hours is bare minimum. They're talking about 1 hour at PT. They're talking about, 2 hours at PT. They're talking about 1 hour at your aerospace studies class a week. And then they're talking about 2 hours at leadership lab. They're not actually accounting for anything else of you have to show up early. You have to prepare this briefing. You have to, community service, all of these things. So he didn't lie. But
gave you the bare minimum.
He gave the bare minimum.
Gotcha.
And one thing I did like about ROTC is that, you're still just a student. So we did have 1 day a week where we'd have to dress up in either our OCPs, which are your camo, or you had to put on service dress, which is kind of the fancy, it almost looks like a suit, blue, you look all spiffy. So you had to wear one of those once a week. And that's when I was like, oh, I'm in ROTC. Because you had to wear it all day long. You have other students kind of looking at you like, what is going on? But besides that, every other day, I was just wearing whatever I wanted to. I might be a little tired from the day because we had PT in the morning and I had to wake up at 5. But besides that, it was just balancing things.
Sure. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like it was all about learning the discipline, the balance, which we all can use that in college and for life. Prepares you for life for sure. So ROTC was not on the docket, but you joined it. And so at what point did you decide that you were going to go into the Air Force? I'm sure you got to decide between the different branches.
Oh, for sure. So you decide actually before you enter ROTC because there are separate ROTCs for each branch. So while we were in our Air Force ROTC group, we literally had Army ROTC in the same building. We had Navy just Navy ROTC in that same building. So we could choose to hang out with them and stuff. However, when you choose to do ROTC, you're choosing which branch at that time. And I chose that based on the friend that my mom had who recommended Air Force.
Okay, sure. So that part was kind of easy then because they kind of prep you before you even start. Okay. Very cool. So you mentioned that you commissioned into the Air Force. Can you talk about what that means for someone listening doesn't know what that means? I mentioned you're our first person that we've had that's become an officer, that's been an officer. So I'm sure being commissioned and officer kind of go hand in hand.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you just explain what all that means, please? Yeah.
So between sophomore and junior year, we get selected. The selection rates vary. So once you join ROTC, it's not guaranteed that you're going to get to the end and commission. So some years when we go to something called field training, where we have to demonstrate our leadership, demonstrate our discipline, demonstrate all of these things, and it's for 3 weeks, at least when I went. I think it's shorter now. Some years it's 100%, some years it's 75%, and it's around there. So if you're selected to go, great, you get through that, you graduate this 3-week, it's like the boot camp on the officer side. So definitely not as intense as basic for enlisted members, not as long. It is intense in the way that we're still marching everywhere. We're still getting yelled at. We're still eating meals in 10 minutes, that type of thing. It's just less intense in the fact that it's shorter. We still don't have our phones, all of that. And this is when I went. So this is 2016. But once you graduate that, and then you get back to your school, you finish, and you have to do something called being contracted. And once you decide to become contracted in ROTC, that means you've committed that the years that I've given to ROTC, I now need to serve those years as an active duty member in the Air Force. So even before commissioning, contracting happens. And that happens at different times for different people. For me, since I didn't have a STEM major, and since I wasn't selected for a scholarship, that happened after field training, after I got the stamp of approval. But for some people, they entered ROTC with a scholarship and they contracted immediately. So once they agreed, okay, ROTC is going to pay for my college, I have to serve 4 years in the Air Force. So for me, it was later. It was a little different of a process. And for me also, since I didn't get a college scholarship through ROTC, that's why I get the GI Bill that I get that is so large. The post 9/11 GI Bill covers a lot. It's quite a bit of money. So for people who got a scholarship earlier, they don't qualify for that because ROTC or because the Air Force has already paid for their undergrad.
Gotcha.
So it was just different. So after I contracted and I'm saying, yes, I'm in, I signed it, we're doing this. Commissioning essentially is an oath stating that I am officially, I've made it through all my classes. I not passed ROTC, but completed ROTC. And now I am an officer in the United States Air Force. So commissioning is essentially just, it's official. So officer and commissioning is hand in hand.
Okay. That's awesome. That's really cool. So just to clarify something, so you were not eligible for the GI Bill in undergrad?
No.
Okay.
So the GI Bill is something that you get active duty. It's not something that you can get during ROTC. It is for ROTC. Yeah, it's either just you get a scholarship or you don't. Okay,
very cool. That's good to know. Listeners, good to know. We're harping on scholarships. So get your money somehow. So once you graduated, you're commissioned. What was the next step? Because you didn't have to go to any other training, or did you have to go to some other training after? Are you like, is it called A school for you all too, or just enlighten me and everybody listening what it's like after you graduated?
Absolutely. So it's called tech school or technical school.
Okay.
And the order of it can be different depending on your career field. So for me, they actually sent me to Illinois, to Scott Air Force Base. I did my job for a little bit, completely clueless. I didn't know what was going on. Of course, I had a whole flight of people who were helping me kind of learn what it means to be an active duty officer. And then a couple months later, I finally got selected to go to my technical school to officially learn how to be a logistics readiness officer. So during that tech school, for me, it was 2 months, and it was in Shepherd Air Force Base, which is in Texas. and you just learn everything about logistics.
Wow.
So it's not about leading, it's all about learning logistics, because ROTC should have taught me how to lead at that point. So that's how it worked for me. However, my husband, he is also an officer. He's cyber, and they for sure have to go to their tech school before they start any job. So his tech school was 6 months. So it kind of just depends on what your job is, how long your tech school will be.
Okay. So that process of the 2 months, it's literally just like you're probably just studying all that time, or like what was that like? What were your days like? You're in class and then probably leave class and study, or how does that go?
Yes. So during tech school, we had class pretty much all day. It was also another way to network. So we're not with, well, I wasn't with anyone but one person from my base. So we had people coming in from all over the U.S., including someone from the Netherlands, which was pretty cool. He was in the Air Force for the Netherlands. So we have people from all over, I guess I could say the world, coming to this tech school to network with each other, but also learn logistics. So we're studying all day, or not studying all day. We're in lectures all day, essentially. Sometimes we're giving briefings on, we might get a topic, something about logistics, and then we have to study up and then brief it to our classmates and our instructor. And then in the evening, either we're studying for an upcoming test or quiz, or we're just hanging out. So it wasn't where it's just like study. After class, sometimes they'd let us go home a little bit early, and we'd hang out with, the friends that we're meeting and making, and just learn about what each other does.
Sure. That's very cool though. I don't think I would have ever thought that people from around the world would come to the US, but I mean, I guess, so could it be that somebody from the US can go to like another country to learn something, or do you think it's pretty much here?
I think it's pretty much here. I think that the U.S. Air Force is a bit more strict on where we get our training, at least the initial training. There's absolutely opportunities to go around the world and learn. But specifically with technical training, I think it's all, if you're in the U.S. Air Force, you're getting it at whichever base they typically hold it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really cool though. I would have never thought. So after, as you see, I like to know like the step by step, but I'm sure somebody listening is probably like, yeah, give us a step by step. So after you finish your training, what are you doing after you finish your training? So I see you've been, so your training was in Texas.
Yes.
So after you trained, what was life like after that?
Right. After I graduated tech school, and that's still within the first year of being an officer for me, I went back to my original base. So it was just a temporary, 2 months. And then I went back to the base that I was at before. And then I actually continued the job that I was doing. So at that time, I was a fuels flight commander. And with that, logistics covers so many different sections and flights, but one of those are fuels. So essentially, the people that I worked with, their job was to fuel vehicles and aircrafts, which is, incredibly important. So my job was to lead everyone, to make sure we got reports done on time, to make sure that people were properly trained, to make sure morale was high. So we'd have events where we'll just cook some hot dogs and hamburgers and hang out and check in on people. And then it was also my job to just learn what people did within fuels, because that knowledge, anytime I would go to a different flight, that knowledge was important essentially for when you gain rank. So when I go from a lieutenant to a captain to a major, at some point, the goal is that this person is going to be a squadron commander, which is above a flight. It's higher than
Yeah.
a flight. And it's a big leadership position. So the goal is this person throughout their career, they've been exposed to different flights. They've gained knowledge about the downfalls, the struggles, how things work, so that once they are in that leadership position, because a squadron commander is the leader of all of logistics at that base. So, or at that location. So the goal is that you have all this knowledge and you're able to lead everyone in that squadron even better because you kind of understand a little bit more. So that's what I was doing for the next, it was like 8 months, because I believe I was there in that position for maybe 2 months before I went to tech school, and I had 8 more months in fuels. And they rotate officers, at least logistics officers, every year, about give and take. So I had about a year in the fuels flight to figure out how to be an officer, figure out what fuels flight did, and all of that jazz.
Okay, this sounds sounds like kind of cool. So I know you went to Saudi Arabia for a period of time.
Yes.
Well, what is deployment like? Is it it's just like random or spontaneous? I should ask. How does that work? And if you can share what you did in Saudi Arabia too.
Sure. So deployment, funny enough, the deployment cell, essentially the people who are in charge of receiving taskings and things that you need to, or people that they need at these deployed locations, is under logistics. So I also learned about just that whole process. But for the deployment, essentially when a deployed location needs people, they'll send out taskings, and they send them to pretty much all of the bases around the US. And it is the squadron commander's job, with, other people's assistance, to see if you can fill those taskings. So to see, do I have the people that can support this? And then once they say yes, then those taskings will go out to the members, and we need one captain. We need a staff sergeant who is certified in a certain level of fuels. So it's pretty specific on what they need usually. And it might not just be a captain, it might just be a CGO, which is a company grade officer. That is second lieutenant, first lieutenant, and captain. That's like those 3 ranks are within a company grade officer. So it goes out like that. So when I was deployed, a tasking came down for Saudi Arabia, and they needed a CGO. So they needed a company grade officer. And at that time, I was a first lieutenant. So I was in it. And I was also in, I don't want to go too deep into the weeds.
Yeah, that's okay. It's fine.
There are 2 bands. So essentially that means either you're in a window where you can deploy, or you're in a window where you cannot deploy. And that's nice, so that you know exactly, okay, this window's coming up, there's a chance that I could be selected for a deployment. So it was my band, it was my window, and they selected me because they did not have, we had other lieutenants, but I was the one. I was the lucky one. So during that deployment, and they gave me a lot of heads up, which was nice. I found out not in my band, so it wasn't my window. However, when it was time for me to deploy, it would have been my window. So they gave me months to prepare mentally to go to Saudi Arabia. And if I'm being honest, it was tough. It was very tough in the fact that I went to a location that's called an expeditionary deployment. So most deployments the location is settled. So they'll have buildings, some of them even have swimming pools. Some of them have, Starbucks and things like that. And it's a little bit more comfortable. But for ours, for Saudi Arabia, since it's expeditionary, that means that they're ready to up and leave at whatever point. So what that looks like is that people are living in tents.
Mm-hmm.
So everything is in a tent. The deployment was on a Saudi Arabian base.
Okay.
And they were letting U.S. Air Force inhabit a part of that base. So we didn't have any Saudi Arabians in our area. They were letting us use a part of, or an area of the base. However, there were no buildings. So the tough part of that location is, okay, now I'm going from being, at home in the comforts of the U.S. to sleeping in a tent with 6 other women, to having to, leave your tent and walk to the bathroom every time you gotta go and, dress inappropriately, etc. To having the gym in tents and everything. And when I say tents, I'm not talking about, typical, we're going camping. They're huge. They're humongous tents. And there's AC, blessed. Because I don't know what I would have been doing without it out there because it's hot.
Imagine.
But I think that was the reason why it was tough, just because of the drastic difference between being at home and being in a completely different country, away from family, away from friends, because I was the only person that left from my base. So I didn't know anybody there. So it was tough, but I learned so much. Woo! I was able to lead and take care of people like I never had to, because it's just stress is high, emotions are high. The mission that we're fulfilling is really important. Not saying that when you're at home it's not, but it's a little bit more important during deployments, because essentially it's like you're training for this. Like this is almost what everything that you're doing is for. So, and I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot.
No, you're fine. No, please. No, I'm loving it. I think it's great.
Okay, but my job was it's called a sortie generation officer. So essentially what I had to do was, since I'm logistics, I had to get parts for the fighter jets while I was there. So it was my job to work with the Saudis to acquire parts, essentially. So let's say a fighter jet, because we need those. We had many. I think we had 30 at that downrange location. If their engine went out, okay, now it's my job to acquire it, get the right one, get it shipped to us, and get it shipped to us as quickly as possible. And so I'm constantly communicating with people within my squadron and then also people outside to get the parts that the aircrafts needed. And essentially that's what I did pretty much the whole time. So it was stressful in the fact that we had pilots and we had the leaders of pilots saying, "Where's my stuff? Get me my stuff." And I'm like, I'm trying. I'm trying. So that's what my experience was as a logistics officer. But there were also other logistics officers there that were doing things completely different from me. So it honestly just depends on what job they give you and what your goal is while you're there.
That's really cool. So you said that Saudi Arabia gave you all like a part of the base. I'm just curious, are there other nations that are on the base as well? Like how's that work?
No, actually. It was just Americans in the area. So it's like you said, is Saudi's base. However, they let U.S. Military members use a humongous portion of it. So we weren't working with anyone else there, but I think it's just because we support them, and maybe there were other nations elsewhere and we just weren't aware of it, but it was just U.S. citizens in our area.
Interesting. No, I love hearing this stuff because this is very far removed from my world, my civilian world. So this is like super cool to hear. So and I don't think I asked you, how long were you deployed in Saudi Arabia?
I was there for 6 months. So for an Air Force deployment, the typical deployment is 6 months. For an Army deployment, I believe this is still the case, but their typical deployment length is 9 months. And then I can't speak on any other branches.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. So after you come home, you were in the Air Force for like another year or so once you came back home?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I was in the Air Force for another, as I look at my calendar,
Yeah.
for another, year plus. Yes.
Okay. I guess this is a question, backup question, and then the follow-up question. What's your I think you mentioned from ROTC, since you did 4 years in that, you're required to do 4 years in the Air Force.
Yes.
Okay. So obviously you can do more. Like, did you go in knowing that you only wanted to do 4 years, or was it when you came back home, you were like, I'm almost done. Like, I'm ready to be done with this, or what was your decision process like once you came back home and you knew you only had like a year or so left?
Right. That is a great question. So for me, I knew that, and I even knew in undergrad that I wanted to do physical therapy eventually.
Yeah.
And I'm going back for a second, but I could have taken, with the military, you can have an educational delay after you graduate undergrad, and you could get a degree if you want to, and then serve after that. However, I was a little bit burnt out from undergrad, so I didn't go that way. However, I knew that I always still wanted to do physical therapy. So when I got back and I was like, woo, that was kind of tough. I started really like heavily pursuing applying to physical therapy programs.
Okay.
And the good thing about that is there were so many options in the fact that I was also applying to one in the Air Force. So there's a program called Army Baylor, Doctor of Physical Therapy program, very competitive. Woo, incredibly competitive. However, if I was able to get into that, spoiler, I did not, I would have been able to stay in the Air Force and do the program. So it's with Baylor. So I would have been able to do that program while I was still an officer, getting paid as an officer, not paying for my doctorate, which would have been incredible. But then what you have to do is you have a 7-year service commitment after that. So I was applying to that program. I actually applied 2 years in a row. So right when I got back, I started working on that application and didn't get it. And then the next year after that, I even told my leadership, I was like, if I can't get into this program, this is my last time trying, and I'm going to have to separate and then try on the outside. And that was because for me personally, I know so many people that love logistics and it just wasn't for me. And that's okay. But it was not for me. And I also had other goals. So I tried the last year, nearing like maybe 6 months before I separated. And I did not get in again. And I said, all righty, well, I'm sorry, Air Force, but and I always knew I was going to choose physical therapy, whether it was in the Air Force or outside of it. So I decided for myself, it's that time, and it is time. But I definitely had to wait until my 4-year commitment was up, because you can't leave before that. And then after that, if I would have decided to stay in as a commissioned officer, you can stay in as long as you want. The process of getting out is 6 months. So if you decide, all right, I'm over it, it's not like a 2-week, it's not like a 2-week resignation or anything, but it is 6 months, and you just apply for it and you start the process of separating. So that's what ended up happening with me. I wouldn't take back my Air Force experience at all. I think the amount of people, just the diversity in thought, the diversity in just people's background and everything was incredible to experience. I learned so much about myself. I learned how to stand up for myself. I learned how to kind of be heard when in some situations people really were not trying to hear me. And I just learned how to care for people. And I think that was such a wonderful thing to gain from it, because I feel like right now I'm pretty good with conflict resolution and emotional intelligence and just learning how to work with people. So I think the Air Force taught me so many wonderful things. And if I could go back, I would do the same thing.
That's awesome. That's awesome to hear. I feel like you just answered the question about highlights and challenges. You did it all there, which is awesome. And just hearing you say, so Taja and I are friends we grew up in church. She's like a little bit younger. Her brother and I are the same age, and her mom is like an auntie to me. So I feel like I heard a lot about your experience while you were in the Air Force. So it's really awesome to hear the things that you learned are life skills, like to hear that you feel like you are a better communicator and you have conflict resolution skills and that your emotional intelligence is higher. So that's really awesome to hear. I'm sure there's parents out there like listening, probably going to be like your mom. It's like, wait a minute, you need to go to the ROTC and then you go in some branch of the military. But it sounds like it was absolutely worth it. And I'm sure it is for many people. I know everyone doesn't have the same experience, but that is like super, super rewarding to hear that it was rewarding for you, not just because of like the benefits, but like the life skills as well.
Yeah, the benefits were definitely a perk. I'll take them. But for me, and I know, everyone's different. Some people will straight up tell you, I'm here for the benefits and that's about it. And that's okay too. Take it. But yeah, I definitely was able to take a lot from the experiences. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love to hear that. Something I was going to ask and it just left my head.
I hate when that
happens. So Kenny's husband, I know it happens to me all the time. His husband, Warren, is our producer, editor, or he's in the background, but he's amazing. So he was in the Army. He's been out of the Army now, but he mentioned when he was deployed as well. I can't remember where he went, but he was deployed, and he said he came back and he knew I think he already knew before he even came back to the States. He was going to separate. He said. So your process was 6 months of having to separate. His may have been the same. I can't remember, but he said they were watching him like a hawk. Like they had to make sure, like a lot of like health testing, and it was a lot of just being monitored. Was yours pretty much the same? Like it's 6 months because they're monitoring you for a specific reason before you separate?
So no, the experience wasn't the same for me for our 6 months. Well, one is heads up so that they could get replacements for our jobs, et cetera, et cetera. But it's also, so when you're separating, you have to go through something called a transition program, so TAP. And it's essentially a class where they're like, make sure you know how to be an adult outside of the military, essentially. So we have to go through that. They have to make sure that we're like financially literate, because there's a very big issue with veterans becoming homeless. So they have to make sure you have housing, you know what your plan is. Do you have a job lined up? And you kind of are doing workshops and stuff. Let's get a LinkedIn set up, stuff like that. So they're more preparing you for when you get out, so that, you don't become someone who's like, oh, wow, I had medical, I had dental, I had just, so many resources, and now they're all gone, and now I don't know what to do. So it was that. And then it was also getting medical in order in regards to, you can file for, and it's recommended for pretty much anyone who's leaving, filing for disability. So Veterans Assistance, VA. So that was a very long process, and that was a go and get examined to see, okay, what's going on? What did you have before you entered? What did you get while you were in? So that was a long process. So if he's talking about kind of on that end, then yes.
It was that, I think. I probably butchered I probably butchered the question,
no,
but I think it was more like, I think it was more of like the monitoring, like you said, for the disability benefit, if that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're just trying to make sure that they're giving you compensation for anything that you got in the military, but then they're also making sure that you're not trying to finesse and say, oh no, the military broke me, when in reality you had this mega issue before you entered type deal. Right. Okay. So yes, that I can agree with that. Absolutely.
Okay. Very cool. If there's any advice you would give, I know you've said a lot of great nuggets already, but if you had advice for someone that is thinking about the Air Force or the military in general, I know you're specific to the Air Force, but whether they are in high school now, maybe they're in college, or there's someone that is in a career and like wants to, go later in life, like what would your advice be to somebody listening?
The main thing is do your research. I really, really think it's so important to figure out what you're about to step into. And that is, what is the commitment look like? What is, the mental and the time commitment for that? How long will this last? How long do you want it to last? What jobs do they have available? What jobs would you want to do? What would you feel comfortable with? What would you not? Would you be okay with deploying? There's so many things to consider when entering, that I think sometimes people are like, I'm just going to go for it and we're going to do it, which is, you love somebody who's gung ho, but you also have to make sure you know what you're getting into, and then so that you don't feel trapped. Cause I knew so many airmen that's like, the recruiter told me this, I jumped in, they were going to pay for all my, whatever, and they're not doing it. And I'm like, don't just take one person's advice and jump in it. You got to really, really ask around and then do that research. And then I think another tidbit is, for me, and this is my problem, I didn't research what being an officer in the Air Force was. So when I was going through ROTC, and this is very candid, I was like, okay, we're doing all this leadership stuff. We're marching around, we're blah, blah, blah. But it didn't dawn on me until senior year that I was like, oh, I'm not going to, whatever job I get selected for, like logistics, I'm not going to be packing boxes, because that's a part of logistics. You can be in cargo, putting things in boxes. I am not going to be that person. I am going to be the person who is essentially in charge of those people. So it didn't even dawn on me that I'm entering a humongous leadership role, just like
young age.
Right. So I think even that, and that's a lesson that I learned the hard way, in that I got in, I'm like, all right, let's do some fuel. And they're like, what? No, you at that desk, you're going to write up a bunch of emails. You're going to deal with, issues that come up. And I'm just like, what? So that might have just been me, a little slow moment, not connecting the dots.
No, but you're balancing a lot of things too. So you're balancing like you're a student, you're an ROTC, you're an RA. So look, college students are overachievers. So I feel like you're just like jumping in. So
I was trying to do the most.
It's okay. It paid off. It did.
So I think that's my biggest bit of knowledge, advice that I can give. And just going in also knowing that you're going to experience people who are from every walk of life. And sometimes their viewpoints or how they function is just not going to align with how you see things. Maybe morals don't line up, and you have to just learn that. And I think that's even in the civilian, like you're gonna experience people, like regardless of what you do. But I think it's just knowing that you have to balance that and navigate that. Yeah.
But no, that's great advice. And I said it before. We say it all the time. Do your research. Do
Yes.
your research. So it's like, so I'm sure people, hopefully people like you just were, people would be candid. Like if somebody would be candid, if somebody asked like, what's this experience like? And I would say too, like, as you mentioned for listeners, ask a variety of people, like talk to people. If you're interested in ROTC, ask people in ROTC what their experience is like. Ask officers, ask lieutenants if you have that connection. Hopefully your recruiter is candid too if you're interested and you're just wanting to ask questions. And I think YouTube is a great resource. There's so much on YouTube, and I feel like people now are doing more like day in the life, or people in the military are sharing their lives a lot more. TikTok and Reddit. So the knowledge is, or like the advice and the tips are like at your fingertips. So please do your research, because you don't want to jump in and I'm sure there were parts of it that you were expecting, and I'm sure some of it was unexpected, but you don't want your whole experience to be unexpected. Yeah.
Just fully unexpected.
Yeah. Everything is like, I'm being deployed. Oh, I'm being, so.
Right.
I think that's great advice. Well, I have two more questions. What is your, so like now to the PT, like what is your plans with becoming a physical therapist? Like what population do you want to work with? Or if I'm sure you do, what are you thinking about career-wise there?
Yeah, so I am definitely leaning towards sports physical therapy. And I've always had a passion for sports. I mean, my undergrad was exercise and sports science. And then I was in a competitive sport when I was younger. So that's just always been my life. And I've experienced physical therapy a lot growing up, and I just love it. So that's my goal. As you said, I start in a few weeks with this program, and it's going to be full time. It's going to be intense. So I'm definitely looking forward to it. A little nervous because it's just a completely different step in my life. It's a completely different journey from what I've experienced thus far. But that's the goal, sports therapy. And if not, while I'm in the program, I'm also excited to see all the other specialties, such as like geriatric, pediatric, neuro. There's just general, like ortho. So we'll see. Maybe my mind will change in a year or two, and I'll just experience something that I love. Like working with kids or something. I don't know, but that's the plan for now.
You're going to be great. That's awesome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm sure people are listening and they're like, they want me to ask this question. I just want to ask the question. Have you been in a fighter jet before? Like, can you fly planes?
No, that's a great question. Wow. I did not say anything about that. So no.
No, okay.
So not everyone, but so many people assume, okay, you're in the Airforce, you fly. Yeah. Absolutely not.
Okay.
There's just, I don't know the percentage, but such a small percent of people who are in the Air Force actually fly. So no, sadly, I have not been in a fighter. Some people as kind of like rewards, they'd be able to go up with a pilot and get to experience that. But I sadly have not. I have been in cargo planes, though. They're way larger. They're not like a fighter plane at all. But I've flown in one coming back from the deployment for part of it. And then I also have just in logistics, I've loaded so many, like with the folks that I work with, of putting cargo onto them. So I've been able to be in at least the cargo planes, but I've never flown. And I've never even been able to be a passenger in a fighter. in a
Yeah.
fighter jet, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like people probably like me are like thinking about Top Gun and like, just
Yeah.
the exhilaration of that. So no, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm glad to ask because I was like, I'd assume that you know how to fly a plane, but maybe you do because
Yeah,
sure other
no.
people made the assumption too. So that's really cool. It's so cool
Yeah.
that you've been in a cargo jet because I feel like I see them like flying sometimes, and I'm like, those
hmm
things look way bigger than a commercial
They're
airline.
huge. Like you could fit vehicles in them. They are
Wow.
so big. You fit vehicles, you fit people, like
Yeah.
they are humongous, some of them. So yes, they are
Wow.
very, very large. Yeah.
Okay.
But I know a lot of people, officer, enlisted side, both
Mhm.
who go and get their private pilot's license while
Okay.
they're in. So some people just have a passion for it and they're like, you know what,
Yeah.
I'm gonna do this on the side. So
Okay. Very
yeah.
cool. Okay. Well, anybody out there, we have an interview with the pilot, somebody from a pilot school. He's a pilot himself,
Ooh.
I believe, too. So yeah, it was really good too. Kemi interviewed him. I think that was from June, and it was really good.
Nice.
I would have had no idea, and I always told her like as an academic advisor, we had so many students that wanted to be
Mhm.
pilots, and they're asking us
Mhm.
like, how do I become a pilot? I'm like, we don't offer a pilot degree at Central Piedmont, but like cool. So I thought it was really cool to
Mhm.
learn all about that. So that's cool that you can
Absolutely.
make that mesh. So
Mhm.
good. But yeah, Tasia, thank you so much for your service as well. That's really
Thanks for
amazing.
having me.
But
No
yeah,
problem.
that you've served our country, and we're wishing you all the best in physical therapy school too. So keep
Thank
us
you.
posted. I'll be checking in on you to see how that's
Absolutely.
going.
You updated.
Please do. But thank you for sharing all that wisdom and just knowledge and your life in the military, in the Air Force specifically too. That's really cool.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me. This was fun. I liked
So cool.
it.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And thank you everybody for listening. Hope you enjoyed the episode. I think Tasia shared a lot of great information, so hopefully it's taken to heart. And Tasia is rounding out our military series for the month of July. So hopefully you've all learned a lot. We've talked to people, well, 2 in the Army, and now we have Tasia in the military. So if you haven't listened to Alice and Warren, so Al talked about going into the Army, and Warren talked about leaving the Army,
Mm.
civilian life after the military. And Tasia shared some of that too. So if you haven't listened to those, then please go check them out. Yeah, thank all 3 of you for your service to our country. That's amazing. And again, thank you, listeners. If you have other careers that you want to hear from, please let us know. You can email us. You can get us on Instagram, the Clock app, as they call it. You can click on just TikTok for those that don't know. You can follow us at Yawson Podcast on Instagram and TikTok. You can email us at yawsonpodcast@gmail.com. If you have other careers that you want to hear about, we're trying our best to get people that we know or like make connections. But if you're interested in something and you're wanting us to reach out to somebody, we're happy to do it. We really enjoy these career chats because we learn a lot. Hopefully you all learn a lot. And it just shows the wealth of careers that are out there that we don't even think about sometimes. So let us know if you have any in mind, or if there's other things you want us to talk about, other topics, our relevant rambles, our after the degree series topics, money matters. Let us know about other topics that you want to hear from us about. We love to get listener input too. But thank you all so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next one. See you.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and listening to the latest episode of Your Advisors Will See You Now. Please make sure to follow us on all of our social media pages and check out our website. Take a look at the show notes below.
And please make sure to subscribe and share this podcast. Also, show us some love and please leave a 5-star review. Catch you next time.
See ya.